Well, hello and welcome to yet another Map Room briefing, where today we're talking about decision making. And maybe we are specifically going back to the sort of kernel of this podcast now 3 years ago, where when we first spoke about what we wanted to achieve by the podcast, we introduced the concept of intentional, circumstantial and consequential decision making. And I really want to go back to that today, and I'd like to explain why. We're seeing a lot of conversations with clients and with lots of other business owners when we're at events where there's more and more people, to me, unsure of where they are in their journey right now. More importantly, maybe where they're going. And I'm seeing, and I'm often witnessing, what I would call knee-jerk or maybe gut reactions and gut-based decision making. And they often come out, therefore, with either ill-considered or consequences that could be damaging to the individual or the business. So that's where we are today. For that, we obviously need our usual subject matter expert. And I'm delighted to say that joining us in the Map Room for a briefing today is Caroline Canty from Craft Coaching. Caroline, thank you so much for giving your time up for us today. And I'm looking forward to this conversation.
No problem. So am I. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Caroline spoke at the recent Bulletproof event, and I was taken aback by some of her content, but also a lot of what she said resonated with me, both from personal experience of my own journey, but also more importantly, what I'm seeing across a number of clients now. And so I'm keen to get Caroline back in, and we will talk about some of those specifics, and I'm sure the conversation will go other places as well. What I wanted to maybe start with is you made a statement on a slide at the event, Caroline, and it really resonated with me. And apologies because I am going to read it. It says, when the soul is out of alignment, your business operates in a reactive, scattered way. Instead of pursuing intentional growth, you end up moving fast and breaking a lot of things, which how many other people recognized themselves in that in the room, I do not know, but I most certainly did. And I did with lots of clients we talked to. So with your approval, I'd love to go back into that and break it down. So when we talk about the soul being out of alignment, what do you mean by that?
So this is terminology that I kind of came up with to describe the three parts of a business that I think constantly work in tandem. So very quickly, for everybody's benefit, the mind, body and soul of a business are how I see a company come together. The mind being usually the leadership team, or depends how you're organized. It might, in some instances, just be the business owner, the one that drives everything. In some cases, it is the C-suite or the board of directors. But the mind is where all the decisions are made, It's where all of the what are we doing conversations happen. And then you have the body being the team. In other words, the mind comes up with thought and the body then executes it. The team are the ones who then carry out those decisions, those things that you want to happen, go forth and create. But the soul of a business is its purpose, its vision, its strategy, it's the tactics, it's the how and the why and the where and all of those things. So when I talk about the soul of a business not being aligned, it's where there is no clear strategy. It's where, if you imagine a business being a bit like a ship, well, you have the captain, which is the C-suite, you have the crew in the form of the body, but then the soul is, do you know the destination? Because without a destination, you won't be leaving the harbour. So the soul not being aligned is very much to do with having lost a purpose, or just maybe it was always there, but maybe you've lost sight of it. Maybe it's twisted and evolved on its own for some reason, and you're not quite sure where you're going anymore.
I think there's a lot of things resonate with me there. I love the ship analogy, because the one thing I would throw into that is the cargo. The why. What is that boat carrying? And that's the other thing, isn't it? If you're a slave boat or you're carrying whatever, you might need to question your value. That's a conversation for another day, really. So that's what you're saying, is that the values have to be there. So then if we go on to talk about your business operates in a reactive, scattered way, how does somebody listening to this recognize that in their business? How do they say, hang on a minute, either I, as the brain, in your analogy, is it my brain working in an illogical and scattered manner, or is my nervous system broken? Am I sending perfectly sensible messages, or what I believe to be sensible messages, but my left foot doesn't know what my right foot's doing?
Yeah. So you will know if you are acting in a reactive, scattered way, if you are subject to shiny object syndrome regularly, if you regularly get distracted, if you are that one that is constantly bringing, well, the competition's doing this to the meeting, or that kind of thing. You are so focused outside that it is just impossible to look inward. And that is a really, going back to my talk at the Bulletproof conference, it's a really, really key indicator that your mind is struggling with a cortisol issue. You are making reactive, scattered decisions because when you are driven by cortisol, you can only think short term. When you are driven by a fear response, your body's job, think of this thing, anything you like. It can be in primitive days, it can be now. But if you think of when you are in a fear response, your body's job in that moment is to keep you alive. It doesn't care what you're going to do tomorrow, because tomorrow might not exist unless it acts right now on your behalf. So when you realize that and think of it in its simplest form, a fear response is there to keep you alive in this moment. That is what matters most. Plus, it's going to mean that if you take that cortisol response, you take that fear-driven message throughout everything that you do, that everything that you do is always going to be short-term. That's where your thinking stops.
I've not thought about this before, but as you were talking then, it was resonating with me. It's the fear of the external influences, isn't it? If you use the example you said there, and I've seen many of these, though, I always say to everyone, forget what the competition's doing. We talk a lot in MAP about forget benchmarks. Benchmarks are an average. First of all, who wants to be an average business or an average business owner? But secondly, what the only thing that matters to you is where you are against your plan. If somebody else wants to go bigger, brighter, faster, slower, opposite direction than you, so what? And I've probably not really thought about that in that way. That the fear mentality is the person who says, well, look, I know we said we were going down this route, but I've read this over here, or the competition's doing that. And I suppose that's the fear element, isn't it? Which is, instead of having maybe more confidence in their own decision making and the decisions they've made and the plan they're on, they're constantly diverting off that plan. I'd not thought of it in that way, which is the fear thing. That makes a lot of sense. I want to break the rest of this sentence slightly, because the next bit is about instead of pursuing intentional growth, you end up moving fast and breaking lots of things. Yeah. I think there's a joint there in the middle, and I'm seeing that, which is why I wanted this conversation today, which is we see a lot of MAP clients, but other, as I say, other small business owners, where throughout the COVID sort of period, there was that survival mentality. There was that, I'm in an area I don't understand. We didn't even know what the word furlough meant. So people have gone through all these experiences that they've never had before. And suddenly they're scared and they're in survival mode. And every decision is in your phraseology, a survival decision. We've come out of that, but your next point of, instead of pursuing intentional growth, I'm seeing lots of people who are either even questioning their goals, their ambitions, their aims, their objectives, or they're still in this, let's not think about next year, let's only think about now mindset. Is that, in your view, an experience of, okay, I'm still in this survival mode because I've not allowed myself to, retrain my brain to make the decisions differently? Or is it an exhaustion? Is it a fatigue thing? But what do you think's driving this sort of constant survival decision making that we're seeing in lots of areas now?
I think it's a combination of things. First of all, to your point, I don't think that in a lot of people's minds, the scarcity that came with COVID ever really stopped, because we went from COVID into, now it's a poor economic climate. There's always something that makes you feel like, well, the market isn't good right now. There is always a reason to be afraid.
There is a risk.
Absolutely. And our brain is perfectly engineered to find it at all times, because that is quite literally how we are wired, is to prioritize risk and threat way above reward. Why? Because it's kept us alive up to this point. And that's why that big shiny reward is never enough. That's why that amazing TED talk that you did when you stood up in front of the team at an annual meeting or something, that's why you got all that energy in the room and then you walked away and nothing changed. Yeah. It's because the big shiny reward is nice to think about, but it doesn't work on its own. And I think that a lot of people took that And I will use the word trauma loosely because I know it's a strong word, but
Yes.
it was quite a traumatic experience for many businesses.
I think I would, Caroline,
Yeah.
I believe that what I'm seeing is people that they're still living in that trauma because they got affected so much that their their um their risk antenna are so alert right now that they see everything as a risk. And in fact, when we're trying to get people to go back to the plan, go back to, I mean, I believe there's safety in a plan. That's might be how my brain's wired. I think maybe there is some should we say post-trauma disorder or stress, whatever you'd call it, in that, and people are just waiting for the next big thing to kick their business under the carpet.
Yeah. I think they basically took the trauma forward. They didn't really ever get over it. People need to understand that that is also normal. Your brain is wired to store those experiences because it wants to keep you safe.
Yeah.
So it will use those things, it will store them, it will remember them. And then that's why anybody that has been fired in the past, for example, will know that years later you will come across a manager that riles you, or you'll hear the words, "Have you got a minute?" And
Yeah.
it'll just spark that fear
Yeah.
response in
Yeah.
your stomach.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's not you. It's you from 10 years ago who was fired. Why?
Yeah.
Because your mind and your body stored that information so that when you need it to perform that response, it will do it like that.
Yeah.
And this is no different. It's just that it's slightly evolved, it's changed, it's on a business level, but it's still there. And if you don't process that and you don't work with, well, why did that happen? If you don't get curious in it, it will lead to reactive, scattered decision making. It will lead to you making decisions for the wrong reasons. It will lead to that stress-led decision making on a daily, monthly, eventually yearly basis. And then you'll wake up 5 years later, as a lot of people have, and be like, why do I still feel like this? Why do I still feel like I can't win clients or I can't do this? It's because it's stored information that was never really processed properly. There's obviously lots of nuance to that, but on a general level, that's how I would describe it.
Saying clear the cache out, because your brain is the hard
Clear
drive.
the cache.
The hard drive is saying,
absolutely,
and risk alert. That makes a lot of sense, because then you're saying that, so because of these issues, so because maybe the vision has been distorted, because the values aren't there, the why's not there, then you're working in this reactive and scattered way, and that's what's stopping you getting your intentional growth. And I'm interested in you're moving fast and breaking lots of things.
Yeah.
I think that there's been a growing culture, very much from design-led business, design sprint, and lots of places now, about this thing about, failing fast. Let's fail fast. I'm not saying there isn't a room for that and there isn't a role for experimentation, but I'm worried that this fail fast, or your phrase, moving fast and breaking things, is almost normalizing this knee-jerk decision making. And it doesn't matter, because if we make 10 of these decisions, as long as one of them's right, we can not worry about the rest. Talk to me what you mean about moving fast and breaking lots of things, please.
Okay, so first of all, let's tackle this idea of failure, because failure is important. Period. We know this. Failure never used to bother us when we were trying to learn to walk and fell over 90 times a day. It never stops us. The problem is that, like you say, there is almost this fast-paced hustle culture that is promoting this idea of, well, if we want to be as good as everybody else, then we need to just jump on the bandwagon, we need to run with it, and we need to just move fast and do everything really fast. But that only works when it is underpinned by an intention, when it is underpinned by a vision. There is absolutely a place for just act now. Just do it. There absolutely is. But only when you have worked out exactly what your strategy, your intention, your visions, your purpose for being is there. Only when it's there. If you act fast without a plan at all, or with maybe a skewed one that was right 5 years ago but isn't right now, if you don't stop and question and make all of those decisions now, then you will never get to a place where moving fast will ever be beneficial to you. You will simply break everything. You will end up with burnt out teams. You will end up with a high turnover rate, both of clients and of team members. So when I talk about this idea of moving fast and breaking everything. It's the difference between being intentional and strategic and not. And I think that something that is really missing is just that starter conversation and getting everybody on the same page in the beginning. And a lot of businesses will say that they do this, but when was the last time you did it, honestly? When was the last time that you sat down with everybody at that high level in a business and asked them to all independently write down, this is a thing that I do, you can take this. And you independently write down what you think the business vision is, what you think the business value, whichever you think is the most important. Ask them to do it independently.
Yeah.
Are they all the same? Could you honestly answer me right now and say that you think if you did that with your senior team, everybody would have the same answer? That is where breaking things and moving too quickly come into the picture. Why? Because persistence only works when you're persistent at the right things. Otherwise, if you persist at the wrong things, you end up, as we all know, in that definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and thinking that you're going to get different results. But all you end up doing is persisting at the wrong thing and therefore breaking everything, rather than persisting in the right direction, knowing that it will come good.
We spoke there about lots of things that come back to the, as I say, at the top of this, the kernel of where we started is the podcast. Was this intentional? We've both used that word a lot in this conversation. It's the intentional decision making, the circumstantial and the consequential. You might use different words for that. But when you talk about being intentional, help us understand what that means for you.
So when I talk about being intentional, this is on a personal level, a team level, and a business level. If you are a business owner that is listening to this, if you're the MD, you have all that pressure and stress on your shoulders. You think everybody is looking to you for the answers. And secretly in the back of your mind, like, oh, I don't know. I wish I did have all the answers, but I don't.
Apologies cutting across you. I want to give you a true confession there myself. I was an MD of a relatively large business before I was 30. And I say there that in retrospect, I made poor decisions. The ego got in the way, but more importantly, I thought it was my responsibility to make the decisions. I thought that's why I had the name above the door. And nowadays I'm completely opposite, which is I'm far more collaborative for those reasons. I can only echo that in my own experience, Caroline, that I was that person that felt I am the decision maker. Therefore, I have to make the decisions.
So I'm really, really glad that you shared that, because this will probably help even more. So when I talk about being intentional, and like I said, if you are that business owner that worries that they have to be the one who has all the answers all the time, then this conversation about intentionality changes slightly. So I'm going to lay out these 3 areas. Yeah. Number 1, on a personal level, you've got to be intentional about what your role is. What does that mean? Well, if you're a leader, what's your strategy when you go into a difficult conversation? Have you thought about that on that level? What's your strategy about how you want to be perceived within your team? What is your intention when you show up, when you wake up every morning, you open your eyes? What's your intention for that day? On a personal level, intentionality can mean everything from, okay, I have so many things on my plate and this is the one thing that I really want to get out of today, all the way through to, I have to have a really, really difficult conversation with the board about our strategy and where we're going. What do I want out of this? And that is a question that people need to ask themselves every single day, no matter what the challenge is that they're up against. People focus on the challenge. They focus on oh my God, I really don't want to have this conversation, or whatever it is. But they rarely stop and think, well, what would good look like?
Yes.
That is as far as strategy needs to go.
Yeah.
What do you want out of it? Doesn't matter what it is on a personal level. Yeah. What do you want to get out of this conversation, this investor meeting, this whatever? Imagine what that looks like. Because we know this in sales and marketing and business, we know this. If you don't have a KPI, you'll never hit it. If you don't have a goal, you'll never hit it because you never defined what it was. So on a basic personal level, that's what intentionality can mean. And I say that as well because you mentioned about that idea of, needing to step into that leader role. And what a lot of leaders do is they'll try and fix everything. They'll try and be the hero. More often than not, you're investing a huge amount of energy into something that never needed to be fixed because you never asked the question, what is it that you need my help with here? You just assume. And if I had to give a piece of advice, and I say this in so many of the trainings that I do, one piece of advice for leaders: assume nothing at all times. Assume nothing. Then second would be on a team level. What's about intentionality within a team? Well, if you just cultivated that idea for yourself, now how can you pass it on to them? How could you switch to being more of that coach and get them to come up with their intentionality? Because this is the thing: if you want people on board with an idea, if you want buy-in, if you want them to, make the best of themselves, it doesn't matter how much you say it can't come from you. It has to come from them. So that intentionality is then something that we need to pass on into them. What's your strategy here? What do you want to do? What are you in this for? And I think that people need to get comfortable with having those sorts of conversations, because your team also needs a strategy. Yes, they need one for work. They also need one for themselves. And whenever everybody aligns themselves with, yes, the business purpose, but also the personal purpose of why they're there, nothing can stop you. And then the third would be coming back to that mind, body, soul idea. The third would then be the soul. The intentionality in that format becomes this idea of strategy or vision. Why do you even exist as a business?
Yeah.
When you first came up with it, why? What made you different from everybody else? And on a grander scale, because maybe you're 10 years in, 20 years in. I work with businesses of all sizes, shapes, and ages. And sometimes it's about, why did you start this? But then sometimes it's also about, if every single business adopted your way of thinking, what would it be? Your reason for being here, what would it be? And then intentionality becomes about, all right, well, now that we understand what that is, we understand why we're here, how do we share it? And now you're into business strategy, tactics, and everything else. So the idea of intentionality, I know I've talked a little bit there, but it means different things depending on which side to this you're looking at. And hopefully there's something in there for everybody.
That does make a lot of sense. And I think the other thing that's often misunderstood is also where you are. We talk about the journey and the map, obviously, but where you are on your journey, because my point there would be there's a perception that agencies have problems obtaining scale. And the reason the perception is because if everybody tells that story, everyone believes the story, go back to your point, everyone sees the risks, everyone thinks it's normal, and we can talk about tribalism and all that. But one of those reasons is that most agencies are founded as a vehicle to fund a craft. And I've said this many times on the podcast, they were a designer, they were a software engineer, they were a something. And the company came along so I could charge. Someone's prepared to pay me for this skill I have, particularly digital marketing when that was relatively new. But suddenly, 5, 6, 7, 10 years in, if we talk about MAP, we're now 12 years. If Paul was here and spoke about, okay, your reasons for founding this business are fundamentally different to what the intention is now 10 years in. And not only has he grown, he's older, he has a family, we have more staff, all that now. And I think it's important to bring that intention back and that review of, okay, where are we today? Are we still the business we started? And that, by the way, that doesn't mean that's a good or a bad thing. It's just, where are we now? And lots of people doing that now, pivoting their agency. But why? Understand it, but also, does it still bring it back to that point of values? Because the reason I said what I said earlier about vision and values is I will challenge people's decision making when they seek to change the plan, when they, let's just say to use your language, they recognize a risk and they want to react to it. I will come back and say, where was that on our strategic orbit? Where was that? Because it wasn't there then. Why do we put it on there now? So intentional, I want to talk about maybe the reverse of that now. So again, when we first started this, we were talking about the battle of emotional versus logical decision making. I know that some intentional things will be emotionally driven, but I'm just gonna, for my brain, I'm gonna put intentional in the logic box at the minute. Okay. You spoke about what you and I recognize as chimp paradox. So you talked about the inner chimp at the Bulletproof event, and we both know that as Dr. Steve Peters' chimp paradox. So let's talk about the clash of emotion versus logic. I think this is probably where your specialism comes out. So we can make emotional decisions because use a really glib one. It's Christmas, Christmas shopping, I managed to markets on, it started to snow. I'm probably going to end up spending 4 or 5 times as much as I planned to because I'm in the mood. So let's park that emotional decision making. Let's talk about the other one, which is the bloke who buys the daffodils from the petrol station because he's not intentionally got his anniversary present or whatever it is. So the stress driven decision. Let's talk about that. You spoke a lot about cortisol, the impact of cortisol, and you mentioned it again today. So help us understand, why does our body react in the way it does? How do I, as the decision maker, let's just use decision maker, because we often talk about business owners, but if we follow your analogy through that says it's about the body delivering on the execution. So we accept something made here, the team, we are then relying, and I always say this, most strategies fail if you assume that the team delivering, understand it, and unless they are delivering those values every day, it's not going to happen. How does anybody recognize stress in their decision making? Recognizing is one thing. How do I counter it? Is there a way of countering it, and is there a way of making better decisions when still accepting you're under stress?
So lots to unpack here. So let's start right at the beginning. Let's start with why our body reacts in this way. So I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, because cortisol is one of the most important hormones in the body. There's so many hormones in the body, but cortisol is the one that gets the most attention. It's also the one that gets the worst rap, because we see it as stress, and stress is bad, and it leads to burnout and all these things. What people need to understand is that cortisol can be your best friend or your worst enemy, depending on if you know how to use it. And what normally happens is, if we think about what cortisol was designed to do, it can sharpen your memory. It can increase blood flow. It can do all of these amazing things in a moment, in a split second, because it was designed to keep you alive. Now, why does our body react in the way that it does in a modern setting when it's incredibly unhelpful? Because sharpening my memory, I've never bloody had that when I've had near a panic attack at work or anything like that. Okay, well, let's just take it a step back. If you imagine this in a primitive setting, I want you to imagine 2 humans in front of you, primitive humans. They can be cavemen if they want, doesn't matter. And I want you to imagine that they
kids then, Caroline.
I mean, you can pick your kids if you like. It's like, even we're still very much what we were. Yeah. We don't like to think of that because we use technology and we're all fancy, but we're still very much the same. You can't outdo thousands of years of evolution in a couple of decades. But I want you to imagine 2 in front of you, and I want you to imagine that there is an apple tree in front of them, and it's full of fruit, but there is insert predator here underneath the tree, whichever is the worst predator to you. It could be a poisonous snake or a bear or a tiger, whatever it is. And which of those 2 humans do you think is the one that will survive? The one that goes, yeah, there is a predator there, but I really want that apple, I'm going to go for it anyway. Or the one that goes, I do not like the look of that, I'm going to find another tree. Which one do you think is going to survive?
Logic tells me it's the person who accepts the risk the predator walks away. But my problem is, my cynical brain also says, but if that apple tree is the only fruit, I'm going to take that risk because I need to eat. So I'm probably the wrong person to answer that one. But logic,
no.
I'm assuming logic would say the person who recognises the threat and lives to fight another day, to use that phrase, maybe.
Right. That, what you just said is, so we're gonna break that down. Okay. So yes, it would be the person, if we're looking at this in a primitive tribal setting, it would be the person that lives to fight another day, because they can go and hunt, they can go and find more food. But if you're dead in that moment, then it's no use to you. So that's coming back to that idea of what we talked about before. The reason why the brain prioritizes threat and risk above reward is because it kept us alive.
Yeah.
Over and over again.
I have a real fear of snakes. My wife waters the garden every night. I know it's a bright yellow hose pipe going across the garden. I have a little shudder.
Yeah. And that is what would have kept us alive. But that, when people say to me, like, but why does my body do this to me now? Because I want that promotion, I want all of these things, I want all these great things, but there's something that's holding me back, and it's fear. It's because your body is designed to prioritize fear over, "Ooh, that could be a nice shiny reward." So that's the first thing about why this happens. But to your point about, but there's also that part of me that's like, well, what if, this might be my only food. This might be my, so that's a really good indicator around, again, of like this idea of scarcity mindset. And I want to put that in a business context because this is so important. I meet with, talk to, work with business owners all the time that take on clients that they know they shouldn't. That progress red flag clients because they're so scared that this might be the only one in the pipeline this month.
Bad clients are better than no clients. Absolutely.
What if I don't get any more though? Like, that the pipeline's there, but what if? So they take on red flag clients. They know in their gut it's wrong. They know they're going to be a pain in the ass. They're probably going to ruin relationships with the team, but it's money in the bank, right? And it's that scarcity mindset that long-term holds them back. So what you've demonstrated there, I'm so glad you said it, because it is the perfect example of that in a modern setting causing chaos. And this idea of how cortisol can impact business decisions. So we've linked the two together without even trying. But some other examples that I can give. So we've given one example of where the strategy's gone awry, okay? Because if you are not completely confident, certain in the plan, and this is the thing, certainty is one of the 5 drivers of human social behavior. And certainty causes the most havoc the more senior you become, especially in business owners. Why? You can never know what tomorrow brings. What next month brings, what next year brings, and that's terrifying. But you can always cheat code certainty with clarity, and that's why strategy works. That is why strategy and having a plan calms your system down, because where is the fear coming from? Well, it's because I'm really uncertain about the future. Okay, well, we can cheat code that with clarity. So we get clarity, we have a strategy, we know that every day we can have complete confidence in how we're showing up and the actions we take. We can have complete confidence in our intention going along the right path. Whereas if we don't have that, then we're just wide open to uncertainty all the time. So when it comes to the soul of the business, the purpose, the strategy, everything else, it can manifest in taking bad clients, or a conversion rate dropping is a really big one. I see that a lot. People come towards me because our proposals used to convert 8 out of 10 and now it's like 2 out of 10. And I say, well, what happened earlier on in the pipeline? Because usually it's because your qualification dropped because you were scared.
We're seeing it a lot, Caroline, right now. Pipeline.
Exactly.
If we said to people, to use your phrase, get your risk antenna out now, tell me even if we said your 3 biggest threats, your 3 biggest concerns, we use a phrase, what's keeping you up at night?
Yeah, absolutely.
Pipeline will be on there. And I can guarantee to you the majority of times we look at the detail, it's because of that. It's they've changed their qualification process, or they just always used to do things a certain way.
100%. And then, so we've also talked about, well, how do we notice a cortisol-driven mindset when we look at the mind of a business, the senior leadership team? Well, we notice that because you've got people trying to throw you off track whenever you go into meetings. You also get selfish managers, and I don't mean that in like a really, really terrible way. Think of what the fear response is designed to do. It's designed for self-preservation.
Yes.
And when you have managers, directors, senior leaders who are operating in a state of fear, they value self-preservation above everything else. That's where you start to see people getting thrown under the bus. That's when you start to see, oh, hands off. I don't want to touch that. I don't want to take accountability for that, because accountability could lead to repercussions. And we don't like that. That's a threat. That's a threat. Don't like it. So they move away from it. Another example, people will back away from accountability because it is a threat. And I see this a lot when I work with commercial teams, and you know that you've got a stress-ridden culture when you have, salespeople that hide, or marketing people that hide behind vague metrics and vague levels of success, because as soon as you put numbers to something, then it's crystal clear and nobody can hide, and that's terrifying. Another example within the team would be where you get bottleneck hero managers, and I talked about this at the Bulletproof conference, the idea of they want to save everyone, they want to save everything. So what do? Somebody comes towards them with a problem, they fix it. Somebody comes towards them with a problem, they fix it. They fix it by default. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, where you get heroes, you also get victims. So you end up with this team, this culture of victimhood, where a manager goes on holiday and everything falls apart. And it's because they were never taught how to survive for themselves. They were never coached or empowered.
Yeah.
So instead, this it's like an interdependent toxic relationship that develops between the manager and the employee, the line report beneath them, because now suddenly this person is a bottleneck and is needed for everything, and this person doesn't feel empowered to make any decisions on their own. So that's a few different examples. Hopefully I've answered all your questions there.
You have, and I think you brought it back in a really intelligent loop, which is, I think a lot of this that I'm seeing now in the market is driven by this, let's just say, COVID trauma, for the reasons we said earlier. And as I say, and we don't wish to diminish that for anyone who did have serious trauma through
Absolutely
that.
not.
But the mindset of everything's now a threat. As the outsourced finance function, we may have a relationship with a finance manager or an operations person within the agency. And throughout COVID, not only sometimes in lots of instances was that individual furloughed or whatever, but suddenly the owners stepped back in to making decisions because it was they were in survival mode. And
Yeah.
I think I'm seeing that carried on a lot now, where teams that used to be capable and able of making their own decisions, the owner has got back in, to use your phrase, to be the hero bottleneck, because
100%.
they've gone back to control mechanisms and control freaks, because I nearly lost my business through this period. Therefore, now I see everything as a risk. And we see people now to us the question, and I'll say, well, that's been in your accounts for the last 4 years. Why have you not asked that before? Because suddenly it's now the risk. They didn't think it was there. But I do think that's a consequence now of that period where everyone's in survival mode. But if you want to be intentional, you've got to be more intelligent decision making. You've got to engage your team, providing the values there and all the rest of it. I want to jump on growth there now, really, because that's the sort of last piece of this loop. We had just over a year ago, so March 24, we had Dr. Damien Hughes from the wonderful High Performance podcast as a guest in the Map Room. And he was talking about growth mindset there. Talk me through your thoughts on growth mindset. What is a growth mindset? How do I recognize if I have one or I don't have one? And how can I either make it better, or how can I adopt a growth mindset?
Okay. So, first of all, I obviously work with a lot of businesses that want to grow. Usually that means money. Well, that's the first reason they bring me in. They want to scale, whether it's scale towards an exit or scale for greater market penetration. You know, they want to scale. Well, scaling is growth. Why is growth so hard? Because growth means change. So everybody wants to grow, but nobody likes change.
Yeah.
Why? Because change is a threat.
Yeah.
Because the minute we try and change anything, we get a fear response. Why? Because our body was designed to keep everything exactly the same, because right now you're alive. That's what matters most, right? Which is when we come first full circle, right back to that idea of a reward is never enough. So how do we cultivate a growth mindset? What is this kind of growth mindset? Well, to me, a growth mindset is one that is adaptive to change, one that embraces change. And how do you do that? And especially, how do you do that en masse in an entire business?
Do you have to, can I ask you a question there on embrace?
Yeah.
Okay. So embrace change. Does that mean you have to be excited by change? You said before about a business owner who maybe chases the shiny things. And very often, we've all worked with somebody who, it doesn't matter what we agreed last month. Yeah, but let me tell you about this really new exciting thing I read in the newspaper, or whatever it is. Newspaper, give me age away. I read online.
Yeah.
Is that to embrace? Can you embrace even if it scares the living daylights out of you? That's what I want to understand. So is embracing change because you are excited by change, or can you embrace change still with a fear barrier or a protection barrier between you and the event?
Yes, you can, but it takes work. And this is where a lot of businesses really struggle, because often work with the MD or the C-suite or whatever, and they're excited about change. The problem is never the mind, usually, because so as in mind, body, soul, it's never the C-suite. The C-suite want change. They say they want change, but then two things happen. Number one, either their fear response kicks in, and then actually I challenge them. And I say, well, why are you doing it this way? Why are you doing that kind of thing? And then the defenses go up and they're actually afraid of it. And that's why when I go in, I don't just do consultancy of this is how to do the strategy to get, X figure. I also need to then, after I've showed them what to do, told them what to do, built the plan, etc., then I need to be there to challenge them of, now, why aren't you taking the action?
Yes.
Why aren't you changing?
Yes.
Because that is the bit that will allow you to go from accepting that change happens, full stop. Change is all around us every single day. We have to accept it because it is a part of change is life. But you have a choice over whether the change that happens to you is intentional, is engineered, or whether it is just evolving on its own.
Yes,
and
correct.
runs away from you. And I use that phrase a lot, the idea of my business ran away from me, because so many business owners that I work with say it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so can you embrace it at the same time as it being scary? Yes. The first step is to accept that it's happening no matter what. The second step is then to challenge why you are afraid of it, and then you embrace it. Now, the thing is, you can do that on a a smaller level. You can do that, I can do that with senior directors or, one-to-one. But how do you do that with a team? You need to give them the support structure to understand and process and work with change. And this is where, hormone hacking is the thing that I talk about comes in, because I've talked a lot about cortisol. And there's loads of strategies that I give businesses to reduce cortisol. But a major one is bringing more oxytocin into the workplace. Now, oxytocin, as everybody probably knows, is the love hormone, and it's more known as in terms of like a social bonding thing and spending time with loved ones and that kind of thing. And that's important. But how does that work in a workplace? Well, first of all, I want you to change the way that you think about the word love. I want you to think about it in terms of fulfillment. I want you to think about, when was the last time you did work you loved?
Yep.
When was the last time your team got the chance to do what they love?
Yep.
And you'll find that the more that you go into managers, the less time they have. Why?
Yep.
Because they were promoted into a manager role because they were great at what they did. Okay. And now they're a manager doing a totally different job, and they don't get a chance to do anything that they love. So they've been ripped away from all the things that made them great and put into a role that they don't know how to do. And that causes intense imposter syndrome and fear responses and everything else. So how do you enable a growth mindset within a team? You need to give them more chances to win. You need to work with them to understand the things that light them up, that purpose that we talked about, that intentionality on a personal level. And you need to give them the support structure that is needed to allow change to happen in the way that you want it to happen, rather than just how it'll happen on its own if you let it run away with itself.
It's the old no feedback is deafening, isn't it? It's the classic. My presentation was great. And at the end, I said, any questions? And nobody asked any questions.
Nobody asked any questions.
We all understood it. But there you go. Yes. Again, I realised that far too late in my career that when I thought I'd communicated something, I realised I had to do it many, many, many times.
Yeah.
Either for people to say, excuse me, I don't understand it, or silence is not understanding, silence is fear of change, etc. Brilliant. I think we've said a lot of things there. You've said something there just at the end, which I'm going to throw your words back at you. May not have been intentional. You said there about holding your clients accountable for the actions that you agree. I think that's a really important thing to understand, because there's lots of people out there either doing what you do or what I do, which is giving advice. And there's lots of consultants out there that are great at producing a fantastic deck of information and leaving you with a beautiful to-do list and wonder why 2 years later it's not gone anywhere. So I think it's important there for maybe just for this point. So help me understand, and therefore anyone listening understand here. So the difference between being able to impart your wisdom of how the brain works and everything else onto one thing is great, but just talk us through your operational delivery then. So how do you keep people intentional? How do you challenge them? How do you keep them on that? I'm going to throw a big pun in there. How do you keep them on that map?
Okay, so look, the engagement that I work with people on is always the same in the beginning. It's usually something around a strategy project. It's usually something that lays the land and designs the plan and all that kind of stuff. But then the way that it morphs, it has to include a coaching element to it, which is where the idea for craft came from, because I truly believe all of this is a new craft. It is something to be mastered over time. And then the more that I developed the business, the more that this came into the mix of the conversation. Because when I first started, I focused on doing like consultancy and stuff, and I kind of was growing coaching as like a one-to-one thing.
Yeah.
But I found that when I went into businesses, exactly as you alluded to there, they take the plan and then they wouldn't do it. That there has got to be somebody in the room that questions why. And that's why I changed my delivery mechanism into being a true blend of both coaching and consultancy. The consultant is there where there are knowledge gaps. I'm there to fill them.
Yeah.
But there has got to be somebody that is not afraid of challenging in the room and saying, but why do you do this in this way? Or, well, look, I'm just holding up a mirror here, okay? You said that you wanted this thing. You said you wanted change. You said you wanted the shiny reward. And over here, we have the plan to do it. So what's the problem? What are you afraid of?
Yeah.
And that is quite a hard question to ask people if you're internal.
Yeah.
Because everybody has this workplace politics, no matter where you work.
Totally.
There's all the emotion, everything that's driving a business. So that's why having somebody like me is often useful, because I can ask that question with genuine, open, honest sincerity.
Yes, absolutely.
What are you afraid of? And they're more likely to respond to me. And then the conversation, the relationship over time, like I've been working with businesses for years, because now they have that relationship with me. It can be a fractional director. It can just be a coach. It can be project-based. There's loads of ways of doing it. But I always am there to show up and to hold people account, to challenge, and to be that voice in the room that isn't afraid to do so. Because that, if we're being honest, is where real change happens. Exactly. That's where real growth and scaling happens. And where people are able to hide, they will do it at all costs. Why? Because they were designed to.
Yep.
You know,
I've seen in my own experience. I echo everything you've said there. And, you know, I'm biased because I do in a different field, but similar advisory.
Oh, yeah.
I always say, but that's why it adds value if you allow it to. The really important thing, as you said there, is that lots of people spend money externally to get this great plan, but actually it's the implementation of that plan that really, really matters. And I think that's between your blend of consultancy and coaching, and the coaching can be as much about working with the team in there to deliver it and understand it. And sometimes I've seen some fantastic ones that even work as that conduit between management and delivery for that reason. I know from running big teams and from owning small businesses, everything you've said today matters. I say to anybody, and I've said it lots of times in this podcast, the difference between those organizations that I was involved in, that I either owned or managed, that were successful or not, was culture. Now, culture means lots of things, but culture to me is the vision, the values, and the support mechanism. We have caring as a key map value for that reason.
Yeah.
You know, we need to demonstrate we care for each other, and we equally care for every one of our clients. I can only speak from personal experience, having been there and done it, that everything you've said adds value, Caroline. If somebody wants to either understand that more, wants to test it with their own business, just wants to understand more of what you know, how does somebody find Caroline Canty?
So 3 ways. Number 1, if you like this kind of topic, I've got a YouTube channel, which is just at Coach by Caroline, that I put out some pilot episodes, really enjoyed it last year. So we're relaunching it this summer, and it's going to be very much talking about the mind, body, and soul of a business in all of these areas, and focusing on helping people to scale, helping people to change and have that within their teams.
Rich.
And then you can find me on LinkedIn, connect with me. I love connecting with people. If you want to have a chat on there, that's also cool, which is it's just / Caroline Canty. It's just my name. And then if you want to find out more about working with me, you can do it there, or you can look at craftcoaching.co.uk.
Well, listen, I can only thank you for your time today.
No problem.
It has been an excellent conversation. And for anyone who's listening or watching, I hope you've got something from it. I'm sure it will lead on to further conversations. And thank you for spending your time once plus more in the map room. Thanks. And
no worries. Thanks for having me.